Hello friends, welcome to this long English speaking practice story. Today, we are going to enjoy a mysterious and exciting story. Listen carefully, repeat the sentences, and improve your English naturally. Let us begin. It was a cold winter night. The sky was dark. Clouds were moving slowly. A soft wind was blowing across the empty railway station. The platform lights were shining, but the place still looked lonely and strange. You were sitting on a metal bench with a small bag beside you. You were waiting for your train. The train was late by 40 minutes. There were only a few passengers on the platform. Some people were looking at their phones. Some were drinking tea. One old man was reading a newspaper. A dog was sleeping near the stairs. You looked at the big clock hanging on the wall. It was 11:47 p.m. You sighed and said softly, "Why are trains always late?" A tea seller passed by and shouted, "Hot tea! Hot tea!" You bought one cup of tea. The tea was warm and fresh. You held the cup in your hands and looked at the tracks. Suddenly, the lights flickered for a second. You looked around. Everything became normal again. You thought maybe it was just a power problem. Then you noticed a man standing near the end of the platform. You were sure he was not there before. He was wearing old-fashioned clothes. A long brown coat. Black shoes. Round glasses. He was holding a small leather bag. He looked confused. He looked scared. He kept turning his head left and right as if he had entered a new world. Slowly, he started walking toward you. Your heart began to beat faster. The man stopped near your bench and asked, "Excuse me, may I sit here?" You moved a little and said, "Yes, of course." He sat down carefully. For a few seconds, both of you stayed silent. Then he asked, "Can you tell me what year this is?" You looked at him and smiled. You thought he was joking. You said, "It is 2026. The man's face changed immediately. His eyes opened wide. His hands started shaking. He whispered, "No, no, that cannot be right." You became serious. You asked, "Are you okay?" He looked at you and said, "I was in 1985 only a few minutes ago." You laughed nervously and said, "Good joke." But he did not laugh. He looked deeply worried. He opened his leather bag and took out some papers. The papers looked old. There were strange drawings on them. Machines. Wires. Numbers. Formulas. You asked, "Who are you?" He answered, "My name is Daniel Carter. I am a scientist." You said, "Scientist?" He nodded. Then he said slowly, "I think I traveled through time." You stared at him. The sound of a train horn came from far away. The wind became stronger. For a moment, everything felt unreal. You asked, "If this is true, how did it happen?" He took a deep breath and began to speak. In 1985, I was working in a secret laboratory. I created an energy machine. It was supposed to study movement through space. But something went wrong. There was a loud sound, a bright flash, and then I woke up here. You listened carefully. He continued, "I do not understand this place. The lights, the screens, the clothes. Everything is different." You slowly took out your smartphone. You showed it to him. He looked shocked. He asked, "What is that device?" You smiled and said, "This is a smartphone." He said, "What does it do?" You replied, "It can call people, send messages, play music, show maps, take photos, watch movies, and connect to the internet." He repeated, "All in one device." You said, "Yes." He leaned back and said, "Impossible." You laughed. Then you asked, "Do you want to see something?" He nodded. You opened a video on your phone. He watched moving images with sound. He looked amazed like a child seeing magic for the first time. He said, "This would change everything in my world." You asked, "What was life like in 1985? He smiled softly. He said, "People had fewer distractions. We visited each other more. We wrote letters. We waited patiently. Life was slower." You asked, "Were people happier?" He thought for a moment. Then he said, "Some were. Some were not. Every time has joy and pain." You nodded. A young boy walked by selling snacks. The scientist looked at the packet chips and asked, "What is that?" You laughed and bought one packet. You gave it to him. He opened it carefully, ate one chip, and said, "Interesting." You both laughed for the first time. The fear between you started disappearing. Now there was curiosity. Now there was friendship. You asked, "Do you have family?" He became quiet. Then he said, "Yes. My wife. My little daughter. If I am truly in 2026, they are gone now." You did not know what to say. You felt sad for him. You said softly, "I am sorry." He looked at the sky and said, "I only wanted to build something great." Silence filled the platform. Then the station speaker announced another delay. You both looked at each other and laughed. You said, "Some things never change." He smiled. After a few minutes, he asked, "Can I ask you something?" You said, "Sure." He asked, "Did the future become better?" You looked at your phone. Then at the tired faces around you. Then at the sleeping dog. Then at the empty tracks. You answered, yes and no. He listened carefully. You said, "Technology became powerful. Medicine improved. People can learn anything online. We can talk to anyone in the world." Then you continued, "But many people are stressed. Many are lonely. Many are always busy." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "So progress solved some problems and created new ones." You said, "Exactly." The lights flickered again. This time longer. The air felt strange. A low humming sound came from nearby. The scientist stood up suddenly. He looked frightened. He said, "It is happening again." You stood up too. You asked, "What is happening?" He pointed near the end of the platform. A bright circle of light was forming in the air. Passengers started shouting. Some people ran away. Some took out phones to record videos. The circle became brighter. The wind grew stronger. Paper flew into the air. The scientist held his bag tightly. He looked at you and said, "This may be my only chance." You asked to go back. He replied, "Maybe." You quickly said, "Wait. Tell me one thing about the future." He smiled. Then he said, "The future is not a place we enter. It is a place we build." The light became blinding. You covered your eyes. There was a loud sound. Then silence. When you opened your eyes, the circle was gone. The wind had stopped. Passengers looked shocked. The scientist had disappeared. Only one old pocket watch was lying on the ground. You picked it up slowly. The watch was still ticking. Your train finally arrived. Doors opened. People entered. But you stayed still for a moment. Because deep inside, you knew your life had changed forever. You entered the train slowly. People were finding their seats, placing bags, calling family members, and adjusting blankets. But your mind was still at the platform. You looked at the old pocket watch in your hand. It was heavy, golden, and beautifully designed. There were tiny symbols carved on the back. They did not look like normal letters. You sat near the window and kept staring at it. The train started moving. The station lights became smaller and smaller. Soon, the train entered the darkness of the night. You whispered, "Was that real?" A middle-aged man sitting across from you looked up and asked, "Did you say something?" You quickly replied, "No, nothing." He nodded and went back to his phone. You opened the pocket watch carefully. Inside, there was no normal clock design. Instead of numbers, there were circles, lines, and moving patterns. The hands of the watch were spinning in different directions. You frowned and said, "This is not a normal watch." Suddenly, the watch became warm. Then brighter. You almost dropped it. A soft vibration moved through your fingers. The train lights blinked once. Then twice. Then everything around you became silent. No sound. No movement. You looked around. Everyone in the train was frozen. The man across from you was stuck while blinking. A child in the next seat was frozen while smiling. Even the tea in a paper cup was not moving. Your breathing became faster. You stood up slowly. You said, "What is happening?" Only you were moving. Only you were awake. Then a voice came from behind. You opened it too soon. You turned quickly. It was the scientist. Daniel Carter was standing near the door. You stepped back in shock. You said, "You are alive." He smiled slightly and said, "For now." You asked, "Where did you go?" He replied, "Not where. When?" You looked confused. He walked closer and pointed at the watch. He said, "That device is connected to the machine. It can pause moments between seconds." You said, "Pause time?" He nodded. You looked around at the frozen passengers. Then you whispered, "This is impossible." He said, "Many things seem impossible until they happen." You had hundreds of questions. But one question came first. You asked, "Why am I here?" He answered, "Because the watch chose you." You said, "A watch cannot choose people." He smiled and said, "That is what I once believed." The train remained silent. Outside the window, even the trees looked frozen. You asked, "What do you want from me?" He became serious. He said, "Something is broken. Time is unstable. I cannot fix it alone." You replied, "Why me? I know nothing about science." He said, "You know something more important." You asked, "What?" He answered, "Trust." You stayed silent. He continued, "I built machines. I solved equations. But I never learned how to trust people." You slowly understood his sadness. You said, "What should I do?" He pointed at the watch and said, "Come with me." Before you could answer, the train disappeared. The seats disappeared. The walls disappeared. Everything turned into white light. You felt weightless. You closed your eyes. When you opened them, you were standing in a huge room. There were machines everywhere. Screens, wires, glass tubes, strange lights. It looked like a hidden laboratory. You asked, "Where are we?" Daniel answered, "My lab." You said, "But your lab was in 1985. He replied, "And also in 2026 and many other years." You looked around in amazement. The room had no windows, but floating clocks covered the walls. Some moved fast. Some moved backward. Some had stopped completely. You asked, "How is this possible?" He said, "This place exists outside normal time." You touched one floating clock. Images appeared in the air. You saw a little girl laughing in a garden. You asked, "Who is she?" Daniel's eyes softened. "My daughter," he said. You looked at him. He added, "I missed her whole life." For the first time, you saw pain behind his intelligence. You said softly, "I'm sorry." He turned away and said, "I thought success mattered more than time with family." Then he looked at you. Do not make the same mistake. You remembered your own life. The people you ignored. The calls you delayed. The moments you thought would wait forever. You felt something deep inside. Daniel walked to a large machine in the center of the room. It had a glowing ring and hundreds of moving parts. He said, "This machine is collapsing. If it breaks, moments from different years will mix together." You asked, "What will happen then?" He replied, "Chaos." You imagined cities changing in seconds. People disappearing. History breaking. You said, "How can we stop it?" He pointed to 3 levers. One person must hold the left lever. One must hold the right. One must reset the core. You asked, "Then let's do it." He looked at you and said, "There is a risk." You asked, "What risk?" He answered, "One person may be trapped outside time forever." Silence filled the room. You looked at the machine. Then at Daniel. Then at the watch. You said, "We don't have much time, right?" He said, "No." You took a deep breath. You grabbed the left lever. Daniel took the right lever. The machine began shaking. Lights flashed everywhere. The floor vibrated. A loud alarm started ringing. Daniel shouted, "When I count to 3, pull." You nodded. He shouted, 1. The room trembled harder. 2. The glowing ring cracked with light. 3. Both of you pulled. Energy burst across the room. You almost lost balance. Daniel ran toward the center core. He placed his hand on the control panel. The machine screamed like thunder. Then suddenly, everything stopped. No sound. No shaking. No light. Just silence. You looked around. The clocks on the wall began moving normally. Forward. Steady. Calm. You smiled and said, "We did it." But Daniel was gone. You shouted, "Daniel." No answer. You ran to the center machine. Only his glasses were lying on the floor. You picked them up. Your throat felt heavy. You whispered, he stayed behind. The pocket watch in your hand opened by itself. Bright light came out again. The room faded. The clocks vanished. The laboratory disappeared. And in 1 second, you were back on the train. Passengers were moving normally. The child was laughing again. The man across from you was scrolling on his phone. The tea was shaking with the train. No one knew anything had happened. You looked at your hand. The pocket watch was gone. Only Daniel's glasses remained. You held them tightly. Then you looked outside the window. The sun was rising. A new day had begun. And you were no longer the same person. The morning sunlight entered through the train window. Golden light touched your face. People were waking up, stretching their arms, folding blankets, and checking their phones. But you were sitting quietly. Daniel's glasses were still in your hand. You looked at them again and again. You asked yourself, did all of that really happen? The train slowed down and entered the next station. Vendors were shouting. Passengers were getting off. New passengers were entering. Life looked normal. But inside you, nothing was normal anymore. You carefully placed the glasses in your bag. Then you looked outside the window. Trees passed by. Fields passed by. Small houses passed by. You noticed something strange. For the first time in a long time, you were not thinking about stress. You were not thinking about money. You were not thinking about likes, views, or notifications. You were simply present. You were watching the world. And it felt beautiful. After a few hours, you reached your city. You got off the train and walked home slowly. The roads were busy. People were honking. Shops were opening. Children were going to school. Everything was the same. But you were different. When you reached home, your mother opened the door. She said, "You came. Why didn't you call me?" Usually, you would answer casually and go to your room. But this time, you smiled and hugged her. She looked surprised. Then happy. She said, "What happened to you today?" You replied, "Nothing. I just missed you." She laughed and said, "Strange boy." That evening, your father returned from work. You sat with him and had tea. You asked about his day. He looked surprised too. Because you had never asked before. That night, you called an old friend. Then another friend. Then someone you had not spoken to in years. You realized something simple and powerful. Time is not only hours and minutes. Time is attention. Time is love. Time is presence. Days passed. Then weeks passed. Your life slowly changed. You wasted less time. You complained less. You listened more. You learned more. You lived more. But one mystery still remained. Who was Daniel Carter? One rainy afternoon, you decided to search for him. You went to the city library. You looked through old newspapers. You searched science magazines. You checked records from the 1980s. After hours of searching, you found a small article. The title said, "Local Scientist Missing After Laboratory Incident, 1985. Your heart started beating faster. You read every word carefully. The article said a young scientist named Daniel Carter disappeared during an experimental energy test. No body was found. No explanation was given. The case remained unsolved. Your hands trembled. It was true. He was real. You copied the article and went home. That night, rain hit the windows. Thunder echoed outside. You opened your bag to look at the article again. But something else was inside. A small envelope. You froze. You were sure it was not there before. Slowly, you opened it. Inside was a folded letter. Your name was written on it. You opened the letter carefully. It said, "If you are reading this, then time remained stable." Your breathing stopped for a moment. It was Daniel's handwriting. You continued reading. "You once asked me if the future becomes better. Now I know the answer. The future becomes better when people become better. Machines can help life. Money can improve comfort. Knowledge can increase power. But kindness gives meaning. Love gives direction. And courage creates change." Tears filled your eyes. You read the next lines. "I spent my life chasing years. But I forgot to value moments. Do not repeat my mistake." You wiped your eyes and continued. Eat with your family. Speak honestly. Forgive quickly. Learn daily. Take risks. Build something useful. And whenever possible, choose wonder over fear. The final line said, "We do not need more time. We need to use the time we already have." There was no signature. Only a small drawing of the pocket watch. You held the letter close to your chest. Outside, the rain slowly stopped. The room became quiet. From that day, you kept the letter safely. Whenever life felt confusing, you read it again. Whenever you felt lazy, you read it again. Whenever you forgot what mattered, you read it again. Years passed. You worked hard. You helped people. You built a meaningful life. You laughed more. You worried less. And sometimes, late at night, you visited the same railway station. You sat on the same bench. You watched the same tracks. You listened to the wind. And every time the lights flickered, you smiled. Because maybe, somewhere between seconds, a scientist was still traveling. And maybe, he was smiling too. Speaking practice sentences. Did that really happen? Life looked normal. But I was different. Time is attention. Time is love. Time is presence. The future becomes better when people become better. Kindness gives meaning. Courage creates change. We need to use the time we already have. Final lesson. Do not wait for a magical moment. This moment is already magical. Use it well.